Millionaire woman threw coffee on a single dad in front of his little girl, but when his daughter's bodyguards surrounded her, a shocking secret from the past turned this fight for dignity into a battle for love, redemption, and family. Can pride give way before it's too late? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Carter's coffee shop, casting warm rays across the polished wooden tables. The aroma of freshly ground beans and warm pastries filled the air, mixing with the gentle hum of conversation and clinking cups. Daniel Carter stood patiently in line, his weathered hands tucked into the pockets of his well-worn jeans. His quiet strength was evident in his straight posture, a habit from his military days that never quite left him. 9-year-old Emily sat at a nearby table, her small fingers gripping a colored pencil as she sketched in her beloved drawing pad. Her dark ponytail swayed as she worked, tongue poking out in concentration. Every few minutes, she'd glance up at her father, offering a bright smile that never failed to warm his heart. "The usual, Mr. Carter?" Jenny, the friendly barista, called out as Daniel approached the counter. Her red curls bounced as she already reached for his regular cup. "Yes, please." "Black coffee," Daniel replied with a gentle nod. "And maybe a hot chocolate for my little artist over there?" Emily's eyes lit up at the mention of her favorite drink, and she gave an excited little bounce in her chair. Daniel couldn't help but smile. These simple morning routines with his daughter were the highlights of his day. The cafe door burst open, letting in a gust of cool air and the sharp click of expensive heels. Veronica Lancaster swept in, her designer suit impeccable, her phone pressed to her ear. "No, absolutely not. I need those numbers by noon." She barked into the device, her voice cutting through the peaceful atmosphere. "I don't care if you have to skip lunch. Make it happen." Daniel had just received his coffee from Jenny when Veronica's rapid stride brought her directly into his path. Time seemed to slow as they collided. His hot coffee splashing across his chest, seeping through his clean white shirt. The burning sensation made him wince, but years of military discipline kept him from crying out. "Watch where you're going," Veronica snapped, jumping back to protect her pristine outfit. Her perfectly made-up face twisted with disdain as she looked Daniel up and down. "Do you have any idea how much this suit costs? You can't just stand around blocking people's way." The cafe fell silent. Other customers turned to stare, some with obvious disapproval at Veronica's outburst. Daniel felt the heat rising in his cheeks, but not from the coffee. He'd faced gunfire without flinching, yet this public humiliation made his stomach churn. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said quietly, reaching for some napkins from the counter. "It was an accident." "An accident?" Veronica's voice dripped with contempt. "Well, your accident could have ruined my entire morning. Some of us have important meetings to attend. Not just." She gestured dismissively at his coffee-stained shirt. "Whatever it is you do." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. He'd learned long ago that dignity didn't require defending itself against cruelty. Still, he could feel the judgment in her eyes, the way she dismissed him as somehow beneath her notice. "Daddy?" Emily's small voice carried across the cafe as she approached, her sketchpad clutched protectively against her chest. Her brown eyes, so like her mother's, darted between her father and the angry woman in front of him. "It's okay, sweetheart," Daniel said softly, trying to shield her from the tension. "We're just leaving." But Emily wasn't moving. She stood rooted to the spot, her little hand reaching out to tug at her father's damp sleeve. The look she gave Veronica was fierce despite her small stature, a lioness cub defending her pride. Jenny appeared with more napkins and a concerned expression. "Mr. Carter, let me help you clean up, and your coffee's on the house today." "That's very kind, but not necessary," Daniel replied, his voice steady despite his embarrassment. He could feel Emily's grip tightening on his sleeve, could sense her building indignation on his behalf. Veronica huffed, finally ending her phone call. "Well, if we're quite finished with this little drama, I'd like to order my coffee. Some of us have actual responsibilities to attend to." Daniel gently tugged Emily's hand, trying to guide her toward the door. He'd rather leave with whatever dignity he could salvage than prolong this uncomfortable scene. But Emily planted her feet firmly, her face set in that determined expression he knew so well. The same one her mother used to wear when standing up for what she believed was right. The coffee still burned against his skin, and his shirt was probably ruined, but those discomforts paled compared to the ache of being dressed down so publicly. He'd faced worse, much worse, during his service years. Yet something about this woman's casual cruelty, her assumption of superiority, cut deeper than he wanted to admit. Emily's small frame trembled slightly, but her chin was raised, her eyes locked onto Veronica with an intensity that seemed beyond her years. Daniel recognized that look. It was the same one she got right before speaking her mind. Consequences be damned. His daughter might be small, but her heart was mighty, and he could tell she wasn't about to let this go. "Come on, Emily," he said softly, trying one more time to guide her toward the exit. "We should get going." But Emily stood her ground, her grip on his sleeve unwavering, ready to defend the father who had always defended her. The morning sun still streamed through those tall windows, but now it felt like a spotlight on this moment of tension. The wealthy businesswoman, the coffee-stained veteran, and the small girl whose sense of justice was about to make itself heard. Emily's small hands balled into fists at her sides as she stepped forward, her usual shyness forgotten in the face of injustice. Her voice, though trembling slightly, rang clear through the now silent cafe. "Don't you dare treat my daddy like that." Her chin lifted, brown eyes blazing with fierce loyalty. "My mommy's in heaven, but daddy is my hero." Daniel's heart clenched at his daughter's words. "Emily, honey," he started, reaching for her shoulder, but she wasn't finished. "He works super hard, and he's the kindest person ever, and you spilled coffee on him on purpose." Emily's voice cracked a little, but she stood her ground, her small frame practically vibrating with protective anger. Before Veronica could respond, heavy footsteps thundered across the cafe floor. Hank Thompson's gruff voice boomed through the space. "Everything okay here, Princess?" The retired Marine's weathered face creased with concern as he positioned himself beside Emily, his broad shoulders creating a protective barrier. Joe Martinez appeared on Emily's other side, his calm presence a stark contrast to Hank's intensity. "Seems like our little guardian angel is handling things just fine," he said with a gentle smile. But his eyes were steel when they met Veronica's. The cafe had gone completely silent, every customer watching the scene unfold. A middle-aged woman at a nearby table spoke up, her voice thick with disapproval. "I saw the whole thing. That poor man was just standing there when she practically ran him over." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "Didn't even apologize," someone else added. "Some people think money buys manners," another customer commented loudly. Veronica's perfectly made-up face flushed red. She glanced around the cafe, clearly unused to being on the receiving end of public criticism. Her manicured fingers clutched her designer purse tighter, knuckles white with tension. I don't have to stand here and be lectured by," she faltered, her usual confidence cracking under the weight of disapproving stares. "By decent folks?" Hank supplied, crossing his arms. His military bearing made him appear even more imposing. "Maybe you should listen. Might learn something." Joe placed a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder. "Why don't we get you and your dad cleaned up?" he suggested, his voice kind but firm. He turned to the barista. "Jenny, could we get some napkins over here?" "Already on it," Jenny called, hurrying over with a stack of napkins and a fresh cup of coffee. "This one's on the house, Mr. Carter." She shot Veronica a pointed look. Daniel accepted the napkins with quiet dignity, dabbing at his coffee-stained shirt. "Thank you, Jenny. That's very kind." His calm demeanor in the face of humiliation only seemed to make the other customers more sympathetic. Emily hadn't moved from her protective stance, but her lower lip was starting to quiver. Daniel recognized the sign that her brave front was about to crack. He quickly knelt beside her, ignoring the dampness of his shirt. "Hey, sunshine," he said softly. "It's okay. Why don't we pack up your drawings and head home?" Veronica took a step backward, her heel catching on the floor. Without another word, she spun around and clicked rapidly toward the door, her perfect posture rigid with embarrassment. The bell jingled sharply as she pushed through, leaving a wake of whispers behind her. "Well, Hank huffed, watching her retreat. That's what I call a tactical withdrawal. Joe helped Emily gather her art supplies, carefully rolling up her latest drawing. You know, little lady, that was quite a speech you gave. Your daddy raised himself a real defender of justice. Emily's face flushed with pride, but she pressed close to Daniel's side, the excitement of the confrontation catching up with her. Daniel wrapped an arm around her shoulders, drawing her near. Thank you all, he said quietly, looking around at the supportive faces. We appreciate it. Let's get you two home, Hank declared, picking up Emily's backpack. These old bones could use a walk anyway. Old bones? Joe chuckled, holding the door open. Speak for yourself, Thompson. I'm just hitting my prime. As they stepped out into the morning sunshine, Hank and Joe naturally fell into formation on either side of Daniel and Emily. It was a habit from their service days that had never quite faded, especially when it came to protecting their honorary niece. You know, Carter, Hank said, his gruff voice carrying a hint of amusement, seems like you've got yourself quite the fan club in there. Jenny's been sweet on you for months. Daniel's ears reddened slightly. She's just being kind, Hank. Kind? Ha! Hank winked at Emily. What do you think, Princess? Should we start a Daniel Carter Appreciation Society? Emily giggled, her earlier distress melting away. Can I be the president? Vice president? Joe corrected with a smile. Your dad's #1 fan position is already taken by a certain little artist I know. They continued down the sidewalk, Emily swinging between her father and Joe while Hank brought up the rear, scanning the street with exaggerated vigilance that made Emily laugh. The morning's unpleasantness began to fade under the warm sun and friendly banter, though Daniel couldn't quite shake the memory of Veronica's face in that final moment. Not the anger or pride, but something else. Something that had looked almost like shame. The city lights twinkled like stars through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Veronica Lancaster's penthouse apartment. She sat in her Italian leather armchair, a half-empty glass of red wine on the marble side table, still fuming about the morning's events at the cafe. The nerve of that child, she muttered, rubbing her temples. The memory of those fierce brown eyes and that trembling voice kept replaying in her mind, making her stomach twist uncomfortably. The soft ding of the elevator announced Margaret, her assistant, arriving with the evening's mail. The older woman stepped into the living room, her sensible shoes quiet against the polished hardwood floor. Your mail, Miss Lancaster, Margaret said, setting down a neat stack of envelopes. And these arrived from Pine Grove Elementary School. They're thank you letters for your annual education fund donation. Veronica waved a manicured hand dismissively. Just put them with the others. She typically didn't read the letters, they were just good PR for the Lancaster Foundation. There's quite a touching one in here, Margaret persisted, adjusting her reading glasses. From a little girl in the 3rd grade. Her teacher marked it as exceptional. Fine, Veronica sighed, holding out her hand. Let me see it. The paper was slightly crumpled, covered in careful but unmistakably childish handwriting. Colorful hearts and stars decorated the margins. Veronica's breath caught as she read the name at the top. Emily Carter. My Dream for a Better World, the essay began. By Emily Carter, age 9. Veronica's hands trembled slightly as she read. In my dream world, nobody would be mean to other people just because they have more money or nicer clothes. My daddy says that what's in your heart matters more than what's in your wallet. He teaches me that even when people are unkind, we should show them love anyway. Sometimes I see rich people look down at others like they're not good enough. It makes me sad because everyone is special. No one is too rich to care or too poor to matter. That's what my mommy used to say before she went to heaven. My daddy works really hard. He helps other veterans who are sad or hurt inside. He doesn't make lots of money, but he makes lots of people smile. That's worth more than gold. When I grow up, I want to help people smile too. I think if everyone could see through a child's eyes, they would remember that being kind is more important than being important. My dream is that one day, rich people and poor people will build playgrounds together, share cookies at lunch, and remember, we're all just people who need friends. Veronica set the letter down, her throat tight. She stood up abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the glittering cityscape below. the same little girl who had stood up to her that morning, had written these words. These pure, honest words that somehow made her designer outfit feel like a costume and her luxurious apartment feel empty. She returned to her chair, picking up the essay again. Margaret quietly excused herself, leaving Veronica alone with Emily's words. The paper trembled in her hands as she reread passages, each one striking deeper than the last. "No one is too rich to care," she whispered to herself, remembering how she'd treated the girl's father. The coffee stains on his shirt, the quiet dignity in his face as he'd tried to leave without confrontation. She'd been so focused on her own inconvenience that she hadn't even really looked at him. The essay sat in her lap like a weight. She tried to set it aside, to dismiss it as childish idealism, but found herself picking it up again and again. Each time, new details caught her attention. The careful way Emily had drawn little stars around her mother's mention, the slight smudge where perhaps a tear had fallen while writing about her father's work with veterans. The clock on the wall chimed 9, but Veronica barely noticed. She was lost in the words of a 9-year-old girl who saw the world with such clarity, such unflinching hope. The same girl who had shown more courage in defending her father than Veronica had ever shown in her entire privileged life. She reached for her wineglass but stopped, suddenly remembering Emily's suggestion about sharing cookies at lunch. Such a simple, innocent way to bridge the gaps between people. When was the last time she'd shared anything with anyone who couldn't advance her social position or business interests? The essay lay open in her lap, its simple truths impossible to ignore. Veronica ran her fingers over the childish handwriting, feeling strangely moved by its artless wisdom. The words seemed to whisper to something long buried in her heart. Something that remembered what it was like to see the world without the barriers of status and wealth. She tried once more to set the letter aside, to return to her usual evening routine of business reports and social media updates. But Emily's words kept drawing her back, like a persistent tug on her conscience. The essay refused to be dismissed, its message too pure, too honest to be forgotten. As the night deepened outside her window, Veronica found herself reading the essay for what must have been the 10th time, each word settling deeper into her thoughts, unsettling everything she thought she knew about success and worth. The aroma of melted cheese and tomato soup filled the modest kitchen of the Carter household. Daniel stood at the stove, carefully flipping grilled cheese sandwiches in a well-worn cast-iron pan. The golden brown bread sizzled, releasing wisps of steam into the evening air. Emily sat at their small kitchen table, her legs swinging beneath her chair as she colored in her sketchbook. Her crayons were scattered across the wooden surface, a rainbow of creativity beside her half-empty soup bowl. "Knock, knock!" a familiar voice called from the front door. "Uncle Hank! Uncle Joe!" Emily jumped up from her chair, her pigtails bouncing as she ran to greet their visitors. The two veterans ducked through the doorway, Hank's salt and pepper hair catching the kitchen light, while Joe's kind eyes crinkled with warmth. They were still wearing their work clothes from the hardware store they owned together. "Something smells mighty fine in here," Joe said, hanging his jacket on the coat rack. Daniel smiled, sliding another perfectly grilled sandwich onto a plate. "Pull up a chair, fellas. There's plenty to go around." Emily tugged both men toward the table, already chattering about her day at school. "Did you see how mad that lady got this morning? She looked like a tomato." "Emily," Daniel gently admonished, setting plates in front of their guests. "Sorry, Daddy," she mumbled, though her eyes still sparkled with mischief. Hank chuckled, dunking a corner of his sandwich into his soup. "You know, Em, your daddy here reminds me of the time we were stationed overseas. There was this commanding officer who always had it out for the new recruits." "Oh no, not the mud pit story," Daniel groaned, but he was smiling. "The mud pit story?" Emily clapped her hands, settling in for one of her favorite tales. Joe picked up the narrative, gesturing with his spoon. "So there we were, running drills in the rain. This officer, mean as a rattlesnake, singles out your dad for no good reason, makes him do extra laps through this giant mud pit." Emily leaned forward, soup forgotten. "What did Daddy do?" "He did every single lap," Hank said proudly. "Didn't complain once. Just kept going with his head held high. By the end of it, that officer had nothing left to say." Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay dignified, even when others aren't. Daniel caught his daughter's eye across the table, his expression gentle but serious. Just like today at the cafe, sweetheart, it's not about winning arguments or getting even. It's about keeping your dignity and showing kindness, even when others don't. Emily nodded thoughtfully, stirring her soup. But she was still mean to you, Daddy. That's her burden to carry, not mine. Daniel replied softly. Remember what we always say? Be the light, Emily recited, not the shadow. Joe reached over and ruffled her hair. Smart kid you've got here, Carter. The conversation drifted to lighter topics as they finished their meal. Hank told stories about their hardware store's most peculiar customers, while Joe demonstrated his infamous sergeant face that still scared shoplifters away. Emily's giggles filled the kitchen, a sound that always made Daniel's heart feel fuller. After dinner, the men helped clean up, despite Daniel's protests. Emily insisted on showing them her latest drawings before they left, proudly displaying a crayon masterpiece of their family Daniel in the center, flanked by his two best friends, all of them wearing superhero capes. Now that's gallery-worthy, Hank declared, earning another beaming smile from Emily. As the evening wound down, Daniel walked his friends to the door. Thanks for having our backs today, guys. Always will, Joe said firmly, clasping Daniel's shoulder. That's what family does. Once they'd left, Daniel helped Emily get ready for bed. She changed into her favorite pajamas, the ones with little stars all over them, and clutched her worn stuffed rabbit as she climbed under the covers. Time for prayers? Daniel asked, sitting on the edge of her bed. Emily nodded, folding her small hands together. She closed her eyes, her face serious with concentration. Dear God, she began in a whisper. Thank you for Daddy and Uncle Hank and Uncle Joe. Thank you for grilled cheese and tomato soup. And, she paused, her brow furrowing slightly, please help the mean lady be kind. Maybe she's sad, and that's why she's angry. Could you make her happy so she won't yell at people anymore? Daniel felt his throat tighten with emotion. Even after being humiliated, his daughter's first instinct was to pray for the person who had hurt them. He leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead, breathing in the sweet smell of her strawberry shampoo. That was a beautiful prayer, sweetheart, he whispered. Emily yawned, snuggling deeper under her blanket. Daddy, do you think God listens to little kids' prayers too? I think he listens extra carefully to little kids' prayers, Daniel assured her, tucking the blanket around her shoulders. Especially brave, kind-hearted ones like you. Her eyes were already drooping as she mumbled, Good, 'cause I really want him to help that lady. Daniel sat there for a moment, watching as his daughter drifted off to sleep. The evening light painted soft shadows across her peaceful face, so much like her mother's. His heart swelled with pride and wonder at the pure, forgiving spirit of this little girl who had become his whole world. The autumn afternoon sun streamed through the classroom windows, casting long shadows across the colorful alphabet charts and student artwork that decorated the walls. Daniel Carter walked down the familiar hallway of Emily's elementary school, his boots making soft thuds against the polished linoleum floor. He'd left work early today, trading his usual maintenance uniform for a clean plaid shirt and jeans. As he approached room 203, an unexpected voice drifted through the half-open door. Daniel froze mid-step. He knew that voice elegant, cultured, and completely out of place in this modest public school. But the little engine didn't give up, Veronica Lancaster read, her designer blazer looking startlingly sophisticated among the plastic chairs and crayon drawings. I think I can. I think I can, it puffed as it climbed the mountain. Daniel stood in the doorway, momentarily stunned. 20 small faces sat cross-legged on a worn carpet, looking up at Veronica. She perched awkwardly on a tiny chair, clearly unused to such humble seating. Her perfectly manicured fingers held the picture book at arm's length, as if unsure how to properly display the illustrations. Mrs. Thompson, Emily's teacher, noticed Daniel and quietly walked over. Mr. Carter, she whispered with a warm smile, Miss Lancaster volunteered to be our guest reader today. Isn't it wonderful? She's already promised to come back next week. Daniel could only nod, his eyes finding Emily in the crowd of students. His daughter sat near the back, her brow furrowed in concentration as she studied Veronica. It was the same expression she wore when trying to solve a particularly difficult puzzle. Veronica's voice wavered slightly as she turned the page. The little engine pulled harder and harder. She tilted the book, struggling to find the right angle in the classroom's fluorescent lighting. A few children fidgeted, their attention wandering. "Show us the pictures," called out a small boy in the front row. "Oh, yes, of course." Veronica's cheeks flushed as she awkwardly turned the book around, holding it too high for the shorter children to see. Mrs. Thompson stepped in smoothly, helping her adjust her grip and position. Daniel watched as Veronica Lancaster, the same woman who'd thrown coffee on him yesterday, attempted to connect with these children. Her usual confidence seemed to have evaporated in the face of 20 honest, unimpressed faces. She stumbled over simple words, cleared her throat too often, and kept glancing at the clock. Emily remained silent, her green eyes never leaving Veronica's face. She hugged her knees to her chest, a position Daniel recognized as her thinking pose. While the other children whispered and squirmed, Emily sat perfectly still, watching and listening, with an intensity that made Daniel's heart ache. She had that same look when she studied old photos of her mother. At last, Veronica read, her voice growing steadier. The little engine reached the top of the mountain. She lowered the book slightly, meeting the children's eyes for the first time. Something in her expression softened as she continued. And all the toys and good food were delivered to the children on the other side. As she closed the book, a few children clapped politely. Mrs. Thompson stepped forward, smiling broadly. "Thank you, Miss Lancaster. Children, what do we say?" "Thank you, Miss Lancaster," the class chorused, some more enthusiastically than others. "You're welcome," Veronica replied, smoothing her skirt as she stood. She looked relieved that her performance was over. The final bell rang, and children began scrambling for their backpacks and lunchboxes. Daniel stepped fully into the classroom, and Veronica's eyes widened when she saw him. She quickly looked away, busying herself with gathering her designer handbag. "Daddy," Emily called out, but instead of running to him as she usually did, she hung back. Her small fingers twisted the hem of her shirt, another nervous habit Daniel knew well. The classroom emptied quickly, leaving only Daniel, Emily, Veronica, and Mrs. Thompson. The teacher seemed to sense the tension in the air. "I'll just be in the office if anyone needs me," Mrs. Thompson said tactfully, slipping out the door. Silence filled the classroom. Daniel struggled to find appropriate words for this bizarre situation. Yesterday, this woman had humiliated him in public. Today, she was reading stories to his daughter's class. Nothing made sense. Veronica spoke first, her words coming out in an uncomfortable rush. "I volunteer with several educational charities. When I learned about this school's reading program, I thought, that is, I wanted to." She trailed off, unable to complete the obvious lie. Daniel just nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He'd learned in the military that sometimes silence was the best response. Emily took a small step forward, her face scrunched up in that serious way that made her look so much like her mother. She looked up at Veronica, then back at Daniel, then at her shoes. "Emily," Daniel said gently. "Ready to go home, sweetheart?" But Emily didn't move toward him. Instead, she took another step toward Veronica, who stood frozen by the teacher's desk. The little girl's voice came out barely above a whisper, but in the quiet classroom, her words rang clear as bells. "Mommy says you're my daddy." The color drained from Veronica's face. The designer handbag slipped from her fingers, hitting the floor with a soft thud. She gripped the edge of the desk, her knuckles turning white. Daniel stood in the doorway, the afternoon sun warm on his back, as his daughter's impossible words hung in the air between them. Veronica stood frozen in the classroom, her designer heels rooted to the spot as Emily's words echoed in her mind. The little girl's bright eyes stared up at her expectantly, filled with an innocence that made Veronica's heart ache. That's impossible, sweetheart," Veronica stammered, her usual composure cracking. You must be thinking of someone else." Her hands trembled as she clutched the storybook she'd been reading moments ago. Emily tilted her head, her pigtails swaying. "But Mommy showed me pictures before she went to heaven. She said you were special to Daddy once." Before Veronica could respond, Daniel appeared in the doorway. He took in the scene: his daughter's earnest face, Veronica's pallor, the tension hanging thick in the air. His jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "Emily, honey," he called softly. "Time to head home. We've got mac and cheese night, remember?" Emily's face lit up at the mention of her favorite dinner, but she hesitated, looking between the adults. Daniel crossed the room in steady strides, placing a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Thank you for reading to the class, Miss Lancaster," he said formally, though his eyes held questions he couldn't voice. "Emily, say goodbye." "Bye, Miss Lancaster," Emily chirped, then added in a whisper, "I won't tell anyone else about the pictures." Daniel guided Emily out, leaving Veronica alone in the suddenly quiet classroom. She sank into the teacher's chair, her legs no longer able to support her. Later that night, Daniel sat in his modest living room, the only light coming from a small lamp beside his armchair. Emily was tucked safely in bed, her evening prayers said, but sleep eluded him. His weathered hands held an old leather photo album, its pages worn from frequent handling. He turned to a particular page, one he hadn't looked at in years. There, partially hidden behind other memories, was a faded Polaroid from another lifetime. A younger version of himself stood in dress blues at a military ball, and beside him, Veronica Lancaster, though she'd been just Ronnie then. Her dark hair was shorter, her smile genuine and unguarded. They looked happy, impossibly young, and completely in love. 9 years ago, before his deployment, before he'd met Sarah, before everything changed. The memories flooded back unbidden. Meeting Veronica at that fundraiser for veterans, her quick wit matching his dry humor. Their whirlwind romance, stolen moments between his training and her graduate studies. Her family's disapproval of a mere soldier courting their Harvard-bound daughter. The painful goodbye when he deployed, and her letter 2 months later, ending things. Daniel closed the album carefully. He'd never told Emily about Veronica, how could he? Sarah had been his wife, Emily's mother, the love who'd helped him heal after Veronica chose her family's expectations over their relationship. But Sarah had known about Veronica. They'd talked about it once, early in their marriage. Had Sarah really shown Emily pictures? And why would she tell their daughter about Veronica? Across town, in her penthouse apartment, Veronica stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city lights sparkled below, but she barely saw them. Her reflection stared back at her, designer outfit perfectly pressed, despite the day's events. A glass of red wine sat untouched on the marble windowsill. Emily's words haunted her. "Mommy says you're my daddy." The timing wasn't impossible, she realized with growing unease. Her relationship with Daniel had ended just months before Emily would have been conceived. But surely she would have known if. She thought of Sarah Carter, the woman Daniel had married. They'd never met, but Veronica had seen the obituary 2 years ago. Sarah had been a pediatric nurse, beloved by her patients and community. The photo had shown her with Daniel and Emily, all three smiling, the perfect family. Veronica picked up the wineglass with trembling fingers. "It can't be true, can it?" she whispered to her reflection. The city lights offered no answer, and the question hung heavy in the quiet of her elegant, empty home. The girl's eyes, hadn't they seemed familiar? That particular shade of brown, the same slight tilt at the corners that Veronica saw every morning in her mirror. But lots of people had brown eyes, she told herself. It was just coincidence, surely. Veronica set the untouched wine down and pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Daniel's face from earlier flashed in her mind, that same quiet dignity she'd once loved, now hardened by years and loss. She'd treated him so badly at the cafe, not even recognizing him at first. How had she become someone who would do that? Emily's essay about kindness lay on her desk, its childish handwriting a stark contrast to the sleek, modern furniture. No one is too rich to care, or too poor to matter. The words seemed to take on new meaning now, weighted with possibilities she'd never considered. The morning sun cast long shadows across the schoolyard as parents gathered to drop off their children. Daniel stood near the entrance, his work boots scuffed but polished. checking Emily's backpack one last time. His daughter bounced on her toes, eager to join her friends who were already racing toward the playground. "Got your lunch money?" Daniel asked, though he knew she did. It was their morning ritual. "Yes, Daddy," Emily replied with an exaggerated sigh that made him smile. "And my homework, and my pencils and—" The click of expensive heels on concrete made them both look up. Veronica Lancaster approached, looking oddly out of place in her cream-colored business suit among the casual clothes of other parents. She walked with purpose, but her hands fidgeted with her designer purse strap, betraying her nervousness. Daniel's posture stiffened slightly, though his face remained neutral. He placed a protective hand on Emily's shoulder, more from instinct than conscious thought. "Good morning," Veronica said, her voice softer than it had been at the cafe. She glanced at Emily before meeting Daniel's eyes. "I was hoping to speak with you for a moment." Emily looked between the adults, her young face brightening with interest. Daniel nodded once, his expression guarded but not unkind. "About yesterday at the cafe," Veronica continued, clearing her throat. "I behaved poorly, very poorly. I wanted to apologize." The words seemed to cost her something, like expensive coins she wasn't used to spending. Daniel noticed she had foregone her usual dramatic makeup, and somehow this made her look more like the young woman he'd known years ago. "That's kind of you to say," Daniel replied evenly. He maintained a careful distance, his body angled slightly away from her. "Apology accepted." Emily tugged at her father's sleeve. "Daddy, can Miss Veronica come to the park with us later? Please? You said we could go after school today." The request hung in the air like a soap bubble, fragile and impossible to ignore. Daniel's jaw tightened briefly, but Emily's hopeful expression made his features soften. "That's very thoughtful, sweetheart. But I'm sure Miss Lancaster is very busy with—" "I'm free," Veronica cut in, surprising herself as much as Daniel. "That island, if it wouldn't be an imposition." Daniel shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to disappoint his daughter. "The community park on Oak Street. We usually go around 4. Emily clapped her hands together. "You'll love it. They have the best swings, and Daddy pushes me so high I can almost touch the clouds." The first bell rang, saving them all from further awkwardness. Emily gave her father a quick hug and waved to Veronica before running off to join her classmates. They watched her go, these two adults with a tangled past, standing feet apart but separated by years of silence. "You don't have to come," Daniel said quietly. "I want to," Veronica replied, then added hastily, "to make things right." The day seemed to crawl by for both of them. Daniel threw himself into his work at the construction site, trying not to think about the afternoon ahead. Veronica sat through meetings distracted, her thoughts drifting to a different time, when she'd been younger and less concerned with status. At 4 o'clock, Daniel and Emily arrived at the park to find Veronica already there, having changed into more casual clothes, though her idea of casual still looked expensive. She sat on a bench, looking uncertain but determined. Emily ran to her immediately. "You came? Do you want to see the playground? Daddy helped build some of it." "Emily," Daniel called gently, "let's give Miss Lancaster some space." "It's fine," Veronica said quickly. "I'd love to see it." They walked together, Emily between them, chattering about her favorite spots. The playground was well maintained but modest, with wooden structures and metal slides that had seen years of happy use. "The monkey bars are the best part," Emily declared. "But Daddy says I have to wait until I'm bigger to try them alone." She pointed to a small gathering of parents near the swings. "Look, there's Mrs. Thompson. Can I go say hi to Katie?" Daniel nodded, and Emily darted off toward her friend, leaving the adults in an uncomfortable silence. They settled on a nearby bench, maintaining a careful distance between them. "She's remarkable," Veronica said softly, watching Emily laugh with her friend. "She is," Daniel agreed, his voice warm with pride. "You've done well with her. I try my best." The silence stretched between them again, heavy with unspoken words. A cool breeze rustled the trees overhead, carrying the sounds of children playing. "I never thought I'd see you volunteering at a school," Daniel finally said, his tone carefully neutral. Veronica smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her pants. People can change, can they? The question wasn't accusatory, but it made Veronica flinch slightly. She watched a group of kids chase each other across the wood chips. "I remember when this was just an empty lot," she said instead of answering. "The Transformation Island." "Impressive." Daniel nodded, recognizing her deflection, but letting it pass. The community came together. Everyone pitched in what they could. Time, materials, labor. That must have been satisfying, creating something lasting for the children. It was. He paused, then added, "Sarah would have loved it." The mention of his late wife hung in the air between them. Veronica's hands clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. "I heard about her passing," she said quietly. "I'm sorry I didn't. That I never." "It's fine." Daniel cut her off. Not unkindly, but firmly. It was a long time ago. They watched Emily swing higher and higher, her laughter carrying across the playground. Neither spoke for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts, their shared history sitting like a physical presence between them. "The coffee shop," Veronica began awkwardly. "I was having a terrible morning, but that's no excuse for—" "You don't need to explain," Daniel interrupted. "We all have bad days." His generosity made her chest tight. She remembered when that kindness had been directed at her, before she'd chosen a different path. Before she'd convinced herself that status and wealth could fill the void she'd created. Emily's voice rang out across the playground. "Daddy, watch this." They both looked up to see her performing some complicated maneuver on the lower bars, her face glowing with achievement. Daniel raised a hand in acknowledgement, his entire expression softening as it always did when he looked at his daughter. "She's fearless," Veronica observed. "Like her mother," Daniel replied automatically, then seemed to regret the words as soon as they left his mouth. The comment settled between them like a stone, and they lapsed back into silence, watching Emily play. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the playground, and a cool breeze carried the first hints of evening. They sat there, these two people with a complicated past, their thoughts heavy with memories neither dared to voice. Daniel steered his weathered pickup truck through the familiar streets of their neighborhood, his mind drifting back to a time he usually kept locked away. Emily was at school, and in the quiet of the cab, memories he'd buried deep began to surface. 10 years ago, the grand ballroom of the Lancaster Hotel had sparkled with crystal chandeliers and the practiced laughter of the city's elite. Daniel, then a young lieutenant in his dress blues, had attended the Veterans Charity Gala as a guest speaker. He remembered feeling out of place among the expensive suits and designer gowns. Then he'd seen her Veronica, radiant in a midnight blue evening dress, her dark hair swept up elegantly. She'd been different then, her smile genuine as she'd approached him after his speech. "That was moving," she'd said, extending her hand. "I'm Veronica Lancaster." "Lieutenant Daniel Carter," he'd replied, surprised by the warmth in her eyes. "Though I suspect you already knew that from the program." She'd laughed a real laugh, not the polite society chuckle he'd heard all evening. "Guilty as charged. But I wanted to hear it from you." The memory shifted to their first date, a quiet dinner, at a small Italian restaurant where they'd talked for hours. Veronica had confessed her frustration with her family's expectations, their insistence that she take over the hotel empire. Daniel had shared his dreams of serving his country, while building a family of his own. For 3 magical months, they'd lived in a bubble of possibility. Stolen moments between his training and her business meetings, late-night phone calls, weekend drives to nowhere in particular. He'd fallen hard for the woman beneath the polished exterior, someone who dreamed of making a real difference in the world. But reality had crashed in like a tidal wave. First came the whispers from her social circle, the raised eyebrows at her dating a common soldier. Then, the not-so-subtle hints from her parents about suitable matches from other wealthy families. The final blow had been his deployment orders, a year-long tour overseas. "We can make it work," he'd insisted, standing in her penthouse apartment the night before he shipped out. "People do long distance all the time." Veronica had turned away, arms wrapped around herself. "My parents are right, Daniel. We're from different worlds. This was beautiful, but it isn't practical." "Since when do you care about practical?" he'd asked, his heart cracking. "What happened to making a difference? To being your own person?" "I have responsibilities," she'd whispered. "To my family, to the business, I can't just." She hadn't finished the sentence. She hadn't needed to. A horn honked, jolting Daniel back to the present. The light had turned green. He eased the truck forward, pushing away the memories of that final goodbye. He'd left for his deployment the next morning, pride and duty masking his heartbreak. When he'd returned a year later, Veronica was engaged to a real estate developer, a suitable match her parents had approved. Life had moved on. He'd met Sarah, a kind-hearted nurse who'd helped him heal. They'd built a beautiful life together, had Emily. Sarah's death from cancer 3 years ago had nearly broken him, but Emily's need for her father had kept him going. Now here was Veronica again, suddenly part of their lives. The coffee shop incident, her appearance at Emily's school, it all felt like some cosmic joke. But Emily's whispered words about her mother saying something about Veronica haunted him. Sarah had never mentioned knowing Veronica. It didn't make sense. Daniel pulled into their driveway, cutting the engine. The house needed a fresh coat of paint, and the garden could use some attention, but it was home. Inside, the afternoon sun streamed through the kitchen windows as Emily settled at the table with her coloring supplies. She hummed softly, completely absorbed in her artwork. "What are you drawing, sweetie?" Daniel asked, starting to prepare dinner. "It's us," Emily declared, holding up the paper. "See? There's you, and me, and Miss Veronica from school." Daniel's hands stilled on the cutting board. In Emily's drawing, 3 stick figures stood holding hands, a tall one, with spiky brown hair, him. A small one with pigtails, Emily. And a figure in a triangle dress with long black hair, Veronica. They all had big smiles, and Emily had drawn hearts floating around them. "That's very nice, honey," he managed, his throat tight. "Why don't you put it in your art folder?" "Can we hang it on the fridge?" Emily asked hopefully. "Not this time," Daniel said gently. "But I'll keep it safe for you, okay?" Emily nodded, already starting another drawing. Daniel carefully took the picture and slipped it into a drawer, trying to ignore the way his hands trembled slightly. The innocent artwork stirred too many questions, too many what-ifs. He watched his daughter coloring contentedly, her small face scrunched in concentration. She had Sarah's kind heart, and giving nature she saw the good in everyone, even those who'd hurt them. But he couldn't let her build castles in the air about Veronica. He couldn't risk Emily getting attached, only to be disappointed when Veronica inevitably returned to her world of wealth and privilege. The drawer seemed to mock him, holding both Emily's hopeful drawing and the weight of his buried past. Daniel turned back to preparing dinner, focusing on the simple rhythm of chopping vegetables. He had to protect Emily. Some doors were better left closed, some memories better left in the past where they belonged. Yet Sarah's alleged words about Veronica nagged at him. What had his late wife known? What secrets had she taken with her? The questions circled his mind like restless birds, but he pushed them away. For now, he had a daughter to feed, homework to check, and a normal evening routine to maintain. The past and Veronica would have to wait. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the ice cream parlor's checkered floor. Daniel watched as Emily pressed her nose against the glass display case, her eyes wide at the rainbow of flavors before her. Beside her, Veronica stood awkwardly in her designer outfit, looking both out of place and somehow right at home. "The mint chocolate chip is really good here," Emily said, tugging at Veronica's sleeve. "It's got real chocolate pieces, not the fake kind." Veronica smiled, her usual composed demeanor softening. "Is that what you recommend?" "Daddy always gets vanilla," Emily confided with an eye roll. "He says why mess with what works." Daniel chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. Someone has to be practical around here. The teenage server behind the counter grinned at their exchange. "The usual for you, Mr. Carter?" "You know me too well, Jake," Daniel replied. Emily bounced on her toes. "I want mint chocolate chip, and Miss Veronica should try it too." Veronica hesitated, then nodded. "Well, if it comes so highly recommended." They settled at a small table near the window, Emily swinging her legs as she dug into her ice cream with enthusiasm. A dot of green appeared on her nose, making Veronica laugh, a genuine sound that surprised even her. "Here," she said, reaching for a napkin and gently wiping Emily's face. The gesture felt natural, motherly, and for a moment the three of them froze in its significance. The next day found them at the public library, where Emily led Veronica by the hand through the children's section. Daniel trailed behind, carrying their growing stack of books. "This is where they have story time," Emily explained, pointing to a corner with colorful cushions. "And over here is where I found that book about sea turtles for my science project." Veronica listened intently, her expensive heels clicking softly on the carpet. She'd swapped her usual power suits for a simple blouse and slacks, though they still probably cost more than Daniel's entire wardrobe. "You really know your way around here," Veronica observed, ducking under a paper dragon hanging from the ceiling. "We come every Wednesday," Emily said proudly. "Daddy says books are like friends that never leave you." Daniel caught Veronica's eye over their daughter's head, sharing a moment of understanding. The walls between them, built by years of separation and misunderstanding, seemed to crack just slightly. As the week progressed, their meetings became more frequent. A quick hello at school pickup turned into walks in the park. Brief conversations extended into shared meals at the local diner. During one such dinner, Emily carefully arranged her French fries into a smiley face. "Miss Veronica, you like ketchup on yours too. Daddy says that's wrong." "Does he now?" Veronica raised an eyebrow at Daniel, a playful challenge in her voice. "It ruins the natural potato flavor," Daniel defended, but his eyes crinkled with amusement. "The natural potato flavor of frozen fries?" Veronica teased, dipping one of her own into a pool of ketchup. Emily watched their exchange with growing delight. "You're like my other mommy now," she declared suddenly, making both adults freeze mid-bite. The diner's ambient noise seemed to fade away as the weight of Emily's words settled over them. Veronica's hand trembled slightly as she set down her fork. Daniel cleared his throat. "Emily, honey," but Emily continued, undaunted by their discomfort. "You read to me like Mommy did, and you fix my hair, and you laugh at Daddy's silly jokes." "They're not silly," Daniel protested weakly, trying to lighten the moment. "They're a little silly," Veronica said softly, her voice gentle. The tension gradually eased as Emily launched into a story about her day at school, but the phrase, "other mommy," lingered in the air between them. As the sun began to set, casting orange light through the diner's windows, they gathered their things to leave. Emily skipped ahead to look at the dessert display, leaving Daniel and Veronica standing together by their booth. "I'm sorry about what she said," Daniel began. "She sometimes—" "No," Veronica interrupted. "Don't apologize. She paused, searching for words. "She's perfect, just as she island." The week culminated in a simple evening at Daniel and Emily's house. Veronica had brought over a board game, and they sat around the kitchen table, the remains of a takeout dinner pushed to one side. "You can't possibly have another draw-four card," Daniel exclaimed, as Veronica laid down her play with a triumphant smile. "I'm just that good," she replied, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "She's beating you bad, Daddy," Emily giggled from her perch between them. Daniel threw his hands up in mock surrender. "I'm being ganged up on by my own flesh and blood." The phrase slipped out naturally, and instead of the usual awkwardness that followed such moments, Veronica found herself laughing, really laughing. Daniel joined in, his deep chuckle harmonizing with her lighter tones. Emily beamed at them both, her small face glowing with joy. As their laughter subsided, she whispered, just loud enough to be heard, "We're a family now." The words hung in the warm kitchen air, fragile as soap bubbles but somehow full of possibility. Neither adult contradicted her, letting the moments stretch out like honey in the soft evening light. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the kitchen table where Emily sat, carefully coloring what looked like her 100th drawing of the week. Daniel sipped his coffee, watching his daughter's small hand move purposefully across the paper. Her tongue poked out slightly, a sure sign she was deep in concentration. "What are you working on there, sweetheart?" he asked, leaning over to peek at her artwork. Emily's crayon paused mid-stroke. "It's my dream playground," she announced, pushing the paper toward him. "See, there's swings, and a big slide, and monkey bars, and even a special spot for kids in wheelchairs, like Tommy from my class." Daniel studied the colorful drawing. Emily had indeed thought of everything, from benches for parents to water fountains shaped like dolphins. His heart swelled with pride at her thoughtfulness. "That's beautiful, Em. But why the empty lot on Mason Street?" "Because?" Emily's eyes lit up. "It's perfect. It's right between the school and the community center, so everybody could use it. Plus," she added softly, "that's where Mommy used to take me to look at butterflies." A knock at the door interrupted their moment. Veronica stood on their porch, elegant as always, but somehow softer these days, less rigid in her expensive clothes. She'd been showing up more often lately, usually with books or art supplies for Emily. "Miss Veronica!" Emily bounced from her chair, drawing clutch to her chest. "You have to see my playground." Daniel watched as his daughter pulled Veronica to the table, chattering excitedly about her vision. Veronica listened intently, asking questions that made Emily beam with pride. "And look," Emily pointed to a squiggly section. "This part has special rubber ground stuff, so kids don't get hurt if they fall. Tommy's mom told me about it." Veronica's perfectly manicured finger traced the drawing. "You've really thought this through, haven't you?" She glanced at Daniel, something sparking in her eyes. "You know, my foundation has been looking for a new community project." Daniel tensed. Here it came, the grand gesture, the attempt to buy their approval. "Veronica," he started, his voice carrying a warning note, but Emily had already caught the meaning. "You mean, you could help build my playground? For real?" Her small face glowed with hope. "We could make it exactly like your drawing," Veronica continued, though her eyes stayed on Daniel. "Safe, accessible, beautiful, a place for everyone." Daniel crossed his arms, studying Veronica's face for any sign of manipulation. But what he saw surprised him. Genuine enthusiasm, yes, but also something like uncertainty. She was actually waiting for his approval. "Daddy, please?" Emily wrapped her arms around his waist. "It could help so many kids. Remember how you always say we should try to make the world better?" His daughter's earnest face broke through his defenses. And wasn't that exactly what he'd taught her? To dream big, to help others, to believe in possibility? "We'd need permits," he said slowly. "Community approval, a proper construction team. I have connections with City Hall," Veronica offered, "and the best contractors in the state. But," she added quickly, "this would be Emily's project, her vision. We'd just be helping make it happen." Emily bounced on her toes. "Can we go look at the lot right now, please?" Daniel checked his watch. It was Saturday, and he had no other plans. I suppose a quick visit couldn't hurt. The lot on Mason Street was exactly as Daniel remembered. A wide expanse of grass and wildflowers, bordered by old oak trees. Emily ran ahead, arms spread wide like wings. "The swings could go here," she called out, spinning in circles. "And the slide could start up on that little hill." Veronica walked beside Daniel, their shoulders occasionally brushing. "She has your vision," she said quietly, "and your heart." Daniel watched his daughter dance through the tall grass, pointing out spots for every feature from her drawing. The morning sun caught her hair, making it glow like a halo. For a moment, he could almost see his late wife's smile in Emily's joy. "Over here could be benches for the grandpas who play chess," Emily declared, patting an imaginary seat. "And see that corner? Perfect for a water fountain." A butterfly fluttered past, and Emily gasped in delight. "Look, it's just like the ones Mommy and I used to watch." The three of them stood together in the empty lot, Emily between them, each holding one of her hands. The morning breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and possibility. In the quiet moment, Daniel could almost see it too, the playground of Emily's dreams, filled with laughter and life. Emily squeezed their hands. "Can you see it?" she whispered. "Can you see how perfect it would be?" Daniel looked down at his daughter's hopeful face, then across at Veronica's tentative smile. The sunlight caught the unshed tears in her eyes, and he realized she was just as moved by this moment as he was. "Yeah, sweetheart," he said softly. "I can see it." The morning sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of First Community Church, casting rainbow patterns across the worn wooden pews. Veronica Lancaster sat stiffly between Daniel and Emily, feeling distinctly out of place in her designer dress among the modest Sunday best of the congregation. She couldn't remember the last time she'd been in a church, probably her grandmother's funeral 15 years ago. Emily bounced slightly in her seat, her patent leather shoes barely reaching the floor. She clutched her children's Bible, decorated with colorful stickers and bookmarks. "Look, Miss Veronica," she whispered, pointing to a particular verse she'd highlighted in neon yellow. "This is my favorite one." Veronica leaned closer, catching a whiff of Emily's strawberry shampoo. The verse read, "Love your neighbor as yourself." Such simple words, yet they made her throat tight with emotion. Daniel glanced over, a gentle smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Emily's our resident Bible scholar," he said softly. "She remembers every story." The pastor, a silver-haired man with kind eyes, stepped up to the pulpit. "Good morning, family," he called out warmly. The congregation responded with a chorus of greetings. Veronica noticed how many people waved at Daniel and Emily. They clearly belonged here. As the worship music began, Emily stood on the pew cushion, singing with unrestrained joy. Her small voice carried the melody of "Amazing Grace" with perfect pitch. Daniel's deeper voice harmonized beside her, rich and sure. Veronica remained silent, but found herself swaying slightly to the familiar tune. An elderly woman in the pew behind them reached forward and squeezed Veronica's shoulder. "So glad you could join us today, dear," she whispered. The simple gesture of welcome brought unexpected tears to Veronica's eyes. During prayer time, Emily's hand shot up when the pastor asked for prayer requests. "I want to pray for Miss Veronica," she announced clearly, "because she's helping us build a playground for all the kids, and because she's becoming part of our family." A murmur of appreciation rippled through the congregation. Veronica felt her cheeks flush hot with embarrassment, but also something else. Pride? Belonging? She couldn't quite name it. The pastor smiled. "That's a beautiful prayer request, Emily. Let's all pray together for Miss Veronica." As heads bowed around her, Veronica felt something crack inside her carefully maintained facade. The pastor's words washed over her. "Lord, we thank you for bringing new friends into our church family. We pray that Miss Veronica feels your love through us." Emily's small hand slipped into hers, warm and trusting. On her other side, she could feel Daniel's steady presence. A tear slid down her cheek before she could stop it. The service continued with more singing, scripture reading, and a sermon about second chances that seemed to speak directly to Veronica's heart. She found herself actually listening, taking mental notes, considering how these ancient words might apply to her modern life. During communion, Emily explained everything in dramatic whispers. "The bread is Jesus' body, and the juice is his blood. But not really. Daddy says it's symbolic." She struggled with the big word. "It helps us remember how much he loves us." When the tray passed, Veronica hesitated. Daniel noticed and whispered, "No pressure. You can just pass it along if you'd prefer." But something made her reach out and take the small piece of bread, the tiny cup of grape juice. As she ate and drank with the congregation, she felt a profound sense of community she hadn't experienced since childhood. After the final hymn, people began gathering their things. Emily tugged on Veronica's sleeve. "Did you like church? Will you come again next week?" Veronica looked down into those hopeful brown eyes. "Yes, I think I would like that very much." The congregation filed out slowly, stopping to chat and hug. Several people introduced themselves to Veronica, genuine warmth in their greetings. No one seemed to care about her designer clothes or her status. Here, she was just another person seeking connection. Daniel touched her elbow lightly. "Thank you for coming today," he said softly. It meant a lot to Emily. Their hands brushed as she turned toward him, and that familiar spark of electricity shot through her fingers. She saw the flash of recognition in his eyes, too. He'd felt it as well. "Thank you for inviting me," she managed to reply, her cheeks warming. Was she actually blushing like a teenager? Daniel's face had colored slightly too as he quickly withdrew his hand. Emily bounced between them, oblivious to the charged moment, chattering about Sunday school and cookies in the fellowship hall. The morning sun caught Daniel's face as they stood in the doorway, highlighting the silver at his temples, the laugh lines around his eyes. For a moment, Veronica saw him as he'd been years ago, the young soldier who'd captured her heart, and also as he was now. A devoted father, a man of quiet strength and dignity. Her designer heels clicked on the church steps as she turned to leave, but the sound seemed less important somehow. The morning had left her with a feeling she couldn't quite describe, like coming home to a place she'd never been before. The bright flash of cameras lit up the small community center as Veronica Lancaster stood at the podium, her perfectly manicured hands resting on either side of the microphone. Behind her, a large architectural rendering showed the proposed playground, all bright colors and swooping slides, with plenty of accessible equipment for children of all abilities. "This project isn't just about building a playground," Veronica announced, her voice carrying confidently across the packed room. "It's about building community." She glanced over at Emily, who sat in the front row between Daniel and his veteran friends, practically vibrating with excitement. The reporters scribbled furiously in their notepads. This was exactly the kind of feel-good story they loved. Wealthy businesswoman funds playground in underprivileged neighborhood. Several of them had already cornered Daniel earlier, pressing him for quotes about what this meant for local families. "Miss Lancaster, is this part of a larger charitable initiative?" one reporter called out. "Will you be personally involved in the construction?" asked another. Veronica handled their questions with practiced ease, but her smile grew more genuine whenever she caught Emily's eye. The little girl beamed back at her, clutching the small sketch she'd made of her dream playground, the drawing that had started it all. Later that evening, Veronica attended the annual Heritage Society Gala, an exclusive gathering of the city's wealthiest families. The grand ballroom of the Parkview Hotel sparkled with crystal chandeliers and silver place settings. Women in designer gowns air-kissed each other's cheeks while their husbands discussed stock portfolios and yacht clubs. "Darling, we saw you in the news today," cooed Margaret Whitman, approaching Veronica with a flute of champagne. Her diamonds caught the light as she touched Veronica's arm. "How charitable of you." "Yes, quite the little project you've taken on," added Bradley Holbrook III, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Though I must say, we were surprised to see you in that part of town." Veronica felt her spine stiffen. "It's a worthy cause," she said firmly. "The children there deserve—" "Oh, of course they do," Margaret cut in, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "And that veteran you've been seen with, such a touching story. What was his name? Daniel something?" "Carter," Bradley supplied. "Daniel Carter. Former military, works as a maintenance supervisor now, I believe." He raised an eyebrow. "Quite a step down from your usual social circle, Veronica." "Daniel is a wonderful father and an honorable man," Veronica defended, but her voice wavered slightly. "Sweetheart," Margaret leaned in closer, lowering her voice to a stage whisper. "We understand wanting to do charity work, but there are proper channels. Getting personally involved with these people." She shook her head. "It's simply not done." More of Veronica's peers gathered around, their perfectly practiced smiles hiding barely concealed judgment. The whispers grew, slumming it. "Midlife crisis, perhaps. Remember when she dated that Italian count? Such a waste of potential." Each comment felt like a needle pricking Veronica's carefully constructed image. She'd spent years building her reputation in these circles, and now she could feel it crumbling. The champagne in her glass suddenly tasted bitter. The next evening, Veronica met Daniel and Emily at a small Italian restaurant, the kind with red checkered tablecloths and candles stuck in old wine bottles. It was Emily's favorite place, but tonight, the cozy atmosphere felt suffocating to Veronica. Emily chatted happily about the playground plans, her fork twirling spaghetti with more enthusiasm than precision. "And Jimmy from my class said his little sister who uses a wheelchair will be able to play too. Isn't that amazing?" Daniel noticed Veronica's distraction. "Everything okay?" he asked quietly, while Emily was focused on her pasta. Something in his gentle concern made Veronica's carefully maintained composure crack. All the whispered comments from the gala came rushing back, along with the weight of her peers' judgment. "No," she snapped, her voice sharper than intended. "No, everything is not okay. Do you have any idea what this is doing to my reputation?" Daniel's expression grew confused. "What? What's doing?" "This?" Veronica gestured between them. Being seen with... She couldn't finish the sentence, but her meaning was clear. Emily's fork clattered against her plate. The little girl's eyes went wide with hurt. With someone beneath your station? Daniel finished quietly, his face hardening. Someone who's just a maintenance supervisor? My friends, my social circle. They're all talking. They think I've lost my mind, throwing away my position to play charity worker in the poor part of town. Is that what this is to you? Daniel's voice remained low, but there was steel in it now. Charity? Emily's lower lip trembled. Miss Veronica? But Veronica was too far gone, all her fears and insecurities pouring out in a bitter flood. I've worked too hard to throw it all away. You don't understand what it's like in my world, the expectations, the pressure. No, Daniel cut her off. I understand perfectly. You're ashamed of us, of me. He placed a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder, of this precious little girl who thought you actually cared. Veronica's chest tightened as she saw tears spilling down Emily's cheeks. For a moment, she wavered. But then she remembered Margaret's mocking smile, Bradley's raised eyebrow, all those whispers. I can't do this, she declared, standing up so abruptly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. I just can't. She grabbed her designer purse, refusing to look at either of them. I'm sorry, but this was a mistake. As she stormed toward the door, she heard Emily's small voice call out, Please don't go. But she didn't turn around. She couldn't bear to see the devastation on their faces, knowing she had caused it. The bell above the restaurant door jingled as she pushed through it, leaving behind a half-eaten meal and 2 broken hearts at a red-checkered table. The morning sunlight streamed through Emily's bedroom window, casting rainbow patterns from the crystal sun catcher onto her wall. She sat cross-legged on her bed, chin propped on her hands, staring at the empty driveway below. Do you think Miss Veronica will come today, Daddy? Emily's voice was small, hopeful. Daniel paused in the doorway, his coffee mug growing cold in his hands. The question cut deeper each time she asked it. 3 days had passed since Veronica's angry departure from their lives, but to Emily, it might as well have been 3 years. Time to get ready for school, sweetheart, he said gently, avoiding the question that had no good answer. Emily's shoulders slumped as she slid off the bed. She shuffled to her closet, pulling out her favorite blue dress, the one Veronica had complimented last week. Daniel's throat tightened. In the kitchen, he packed Emily's lunch with mechanical movements. Turkey sandwich, apple slices, cookies. The routine helped keep his mind off the ache in his chest. His veteran friends, Hank and Joe, had offered to take Emily for ice cream after school, trying to lift her spirits. But even they couldn't fill the void Veronica had left. Across town in her penthouse apartment, Veronica Lancaster stood before floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city wake up below. An untouched cup of expensive coffee sat on her marble counter. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, testimony to another sleepless night. Your 9 a.m. meeting is confirmed, Miss Lancaster. Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. And the board would like your decision about the community center funding by end of day. Veronica pressed the button. Cancel everything. She wandered through her immaculate apartment, designer heels clicking on hardwood floors. Everything was perfect, polished, cold. Like her life before Emily's essay. Before the playground plans. Before Daniel's quiet strength had reminded her of who she used to be. Her phone buzzed. Another message from her social circle, probably about the upcoming charity gala. She ignored it. Their mockery at the last event still rang in her ears. Really, Veronica? Playing mother to some veteran's child? How charitable of you. The words had stung, but what hurt more was how quickly she'd let them get to her. How easily she'd thrown away something real to preserve something fake. Back at the Carter house, Daniel helped Emily tie her shoes for school. Her movements were slower than usual, lacking their normal morning bounce. Can we drive by the playground spot? Emily asked suddenly. Just to see? Daniel's hand stilled on her shoelaces. The empty lot where they'd stood with Veronica, planning and dreaming, where Emily had spun in circles, describing where every swing and slide would go, where, for a brief moment, they'd felt like a real family. Not today, Em, he said softly. We'll be late for school. In her classroom, Emily pulled out her sketchbook during free time. Miss Wilson, her teacher, watched with concern as the little girl added to the drawing she'd been working on all week, 3 figures holding hands in front of a colorful playground. "That's a lovely picture, Emily," Miss Wilson said, kneeling beside her desk. "Is that your family?" Emily nodded, carefully coloring Veronica's golden hair. "It was supposed to be," she whispered. The teacher's heart broke a little. She'd seen Veronica volunteering, watched the connection growing between her and the Carters. She'd also noticed Emily's subdued behavior since Veronica stopped coming. At her mansion, Veronica found herself in her home office, staring at Emily's essay pinned to her bulletin board. "No one is too rich to care, or too poor to matter." The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. She pulled open her desk drawer, where she'd hidden the photos from their days at the park, the library, the ice cream shop. Emily's face beamed in every one. Daniel's gentle smile, a constant presence. When had she started feeling more at home, in their modest house, than in her luxury penthouse? The afternoon dragged on. Daniel threw himself into work at his construction company, reviewing blueprints until the numbers swam before his eyes. Anything to keep from thinking about Veronica's final words, the way she'd looked at him like he was beneath her, just as she had that first day in the cafe. But he couldn't stop remembering other moments. Her genuine laugh when Emily told jokes, the way she'd rolled up her designer sleeves to help with dinner, how natural she'd looked, sitting in their worn living room, reading bedtime stories. Evening settled over the city. Emily picked at her dinner, pushing peas around her plate. "Hank and Joe said the ice cream was really good today," Daniel prompted, trying to spark conversation. "It wasn't the same," Emily mumbled. "Miss Veronica always let me have sprinkles and chocolate sauce." Daniel set down his fork, reaching across to squeeze her small hand. "Sometimes people come into our lives for just a little while, Em. It doesn't mean they didn't care. But she promised." Emily's voice cracked. "She promised to help build the playground. She promised to come to my school play. She promised." Daniel pulled his daughter into his lap as the tears finally came. She buried her face in his shirt, her small body shaking with sobs. He rocked her gently, his own eyes burning. "I know, baby. I know." Later that night, after tucking Emily into bed, Daniel noticed she'd fallen asleep clutching her drawing. The paper was wrinkled from being held so tight, but the 3 figures still smiled, frozen in a moment of happiness that now felt like a dream. He carefully smoothed the drawing, studying the details his daughter had added. The matching smiles on all their faces, the hearts floating in the air, the bright sun shining down on their little family. Sitting on the edge of Emily's bed, Daniel watched his daughter's peaceful sleep, her cheeks still damp from tears. The moonlight cast soft shadows across her face, so much like her mother's, his first wife, who'd loved them both completely until cancer stole her away. He brushed a strand of hair from Emily's forehead, his heart heavy with a father's helpless pain at watching his child hurt. "I won't let her break you too," he whispered into the quiet room, his voice barely audible above the soft whir of the ceiling fan. The drawing lay on Emily's nightstand, a paper testament to dreams that had bloomed and withered in the space of a few short weeks. Outside, the city hummed with nightlife, unaware of the small heartbreaks playing out behind lit windows and closed doors. Veronica's heels clicked against the marble floors of her penthouse, each echo bouncing off the pristine white walls. Designer furniture worth thousands sat unused in perfectly arranged rooms. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting rainbow reflections that danced across empty spaces where life should have been. She paused by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring at the city lights below. From up here, everyone looked so small. That's what her friends had always told her. That people like Daniel were beneath them. That's what she had believed for so long. Her fingers traced the cool glass. "What am I doing?" she whispered to her reflection. Walking to her home office, Veronica's gaze fell on Emily's essay, still sitting on her desk where she'd left it days ago. She picked up the wrinkled paper, Emily's childish handwriting bringing an ache to her chest. "No one is too rich to care, or too poor to matter," she read aloud, her voice catching. Memories of the past weeks flooded back. Emily's bright smile as she showed off her drawings. Daniel's quiet strength as he helped at the playground site. the warmth of their simple family dinners. Such small moments, yet they had filled her with more joy than all the galas and charity events of the past decade. Veronica sank into her Italian leather chair, the essay trembling in her hands. A tear splashed onto the paper, smudging Emily's careful words. More followed as the weight of her actions crashed down on her. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the empty room. "I'm so sorry." She thought of Emily's face when she'd stormed out of their dinner, the hurt and confusion in those innocent eyes. Daniel hadn't said a word, just pulled Emily close, as Veronica had spewed her bitter words. Even then, he'd shown more class than she had. Rising shakily, Veronica walked to her bedroom. The massive space felt like a museum, beautiful but lifeless. Her gaze fell on the designer clothes filling her walk-in closet, the expensive jewelry scattered across her vanity. "All of this," she muttered. "And I'm more alone than ever." She caught her reflection in the vanity mirror, perfectly styled hair, flawless makeup, designer outfit. The image of success she'd worked so hard to maintain. But beneath it all was a woman who'd just hurt the two people who had actually seen her real self. Veronica picked up her phone, scrolling through recent photos. There was Emily at the ice cream shop, chocolate smeared across her chin. Daniel at the playground site, sleeves rolled up as he reviewed construction plans. The three of them at church, Emily squeezed between them in the pew. Her social circle would never understand. They'd mock these simple moments, call them beneath her status. But looking at these photos now, Veronica realized they captured something her wealthy friends had never given her: genuine love. Walking back to the living room, Veronica's footsteps echoed in the silence. She'd filled this place with expensive things, thinking they'd make her happy. Now, the emptiness felt suffocating. She remembered Emily's prayer at church. "Dear God, thank you for bringing Miss Veronica to us. Please, help her stay forever." Fresh tears spilled down Veronica's cheeks. That little girl had welcomed her with open arms, offering pure love despite Veronica's earlier cruelty. And Daniel, he'd given her a second chance, letting her into their lives despite their painful history. The essay crumpled in her grip as she sank onto her pristine white couch. Her carefully constructed world of wealth and status felt like a prison now. She'd let her so-called friends poison something beautiful with their judgment and mockery. "What have I done?" she whispered, her voice breaking. The silence of her luxury prison answered back. No child's laughter here, no warm embraces, no simple joy of sharing dinner with people who truly cared. Veronica stood, walking to her terrace. The cool night air hit her tear-stained face as she looked out over the glittering city. Somewhere out there, in a modest home filled with love, Emily was probably asking Daniel again when Veronica would return. The thought sent fresh pain through her heart. She'd abandoned them, just like she'd abandoned Daniel years ago when her family disapproved. History repeating itself because she still lacked the courage to fight for what mattered. Back inside, Veronica picked up Emily's essay one more time. The words blurred through her tears, but she knew them by heart now. A child's wisdom, cutting through all her adult pretensions. "I've been given a second chance," she whispered into the emptiness of her perfect, lonely home, "and I'm throwing it away." The community center buzzed with quiet energy as people filed into rows of folding chairs. Small American flags decorated the walls, and a humble podium stood at the front, draped with red, white, and blue bunting. The annual Veterans Fundraiser had drawn its usual crowd of supporters, families, and former service members. Emily Carter sat in the front row, practically bouncing in her seat. She wore her best blue dress, the one with tiny white stars that matched the decorations. Her small hands clutched a wrinkled program where her father's name was printed. Guest speaker, Daniel Carter, Staff Sergeant, U.S. Army, Retter. "Is Daddy nervous?" Emily whispered to Hank, who sat beside her in his pressed uniform jacket. "Your old man?" "Nah." Hank winked. "He led troops into battle. This is just talking to friends." Joe, seated on Emily's other side, leaned in. Although he did check his tie about 20 times. Emily giggled, but her eyes never left the side of the stage where Daniel waited. He stood tall in his own dress uniform, polished metals catching the light. Though his expression remained calm, his fingers kept brushing the edge of the small note card in his pocket. The center's director stepped up to introduce him. Our next speaker knows firsthand about sacrifice and dignity. Please welcome Staff Sergeant Daniel Carter. Daniel walked to the podium, his steps measured and sure. The audience applauded warmly, with Emily's enthusiastic clapping rising above the rest. He adjusted the microphone, cleared his throat, and began to speak in that steady voice Emily knew so well from bedtime stories. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Daniel said. "When they asked me to speak about dignity and resilience, I thought about grand moments of courage under fire. But true dignity isn't always about dramatic choices. Sometimes it's about the quiet decisions we make every day." He paused, his eyes finding Emily's proud face in the crowd. "My daughter taught me that. She showed me that dignity means choosing kindness, even when others don't. It means standing tall without stepping on anyone else." The words filled the hall, touching something deep in each listener. Daniel spoke about his years of service, about losing his wife, about raising Emily alone. But mostly, he spoke about community, the neighbors who brought casseroles, the fellow veterans who became family, the strangers who became friends. "We're all connected," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "Rich or poor, civilian or soldier, we're part of something bigger than ourselves. True resilience isn't about standing alone, it's about standing together." Emily beamed at her father, her eyes shining. She knew every struggle behind his words, every lonely night, every brave smile he'd worn just for her. But she also knew his strength, his unwavering faith that good would prevail. "In our darkest moments," Daniel said, "dignity means remembering who we are. It means holding on to our humanity even when it would be easier to let go. It means believing in second chances." A slight movement at the back of the hall caught Emily's attention. The heavy doors had opened silently, admitting a familiar figure. Veronica Lancaster stood in the shadows, her designer dress out of place among the simple suits and uniforms. But for once, she wasn't trying to stand out. Tears tracked down Veronica's cheeks as she listened, her perfectly applied makeup forgotten. Her hands trembled slightly as Daniel's words washed over her. "Life has taught me that true strength often comes disguised as weakness," Daniel continued, unaware of her presence. "Sometimes it looks like forgiveness when anger would be easier. Sometimes it looks like hope when bitterness feels safer." Emily noticed how Veronica pressed one hand to her heart as if trying to hold something inside. The proud businesswoman who had once looked down on them now stood humbled in the back row, tears falling freely. "We all make mistakes," Daniel's voice softened. "We all fall short of who we want to be. But dignity means getting back up, not just for ourselves, but for each other. It means remembering that every person, no matter their rank or status, deserves respect and compassion." The audience sat transfixed, many nodding in agreement. Some dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. Even Hank and Joe, who had heard Daniel speak before, listened intently. "I stand here today," Daniel concluded, "not as a hero or a perfect example, but as someone who's learned that true dignity lies in how we treat each other. In the end, that's what builds resilience, not walls of pride or prejudice, but bridges of understanding and grace." The applause started slowly, then built to a thunderous standing ovation. Emily jumped to her feet, clapping until her hands hurt. "That's my daddy," she called out proudly, making those nearby smile at her enthusiasm. Through it all, Veronica remained in the shadows, wiping her eyes with trembling fingers. She watched as Emily ran to hug her father, as veterans stepped forward to shake his hand, as the community embraced him with their warmth and respect. Daniel's words about dignity and second chances hung in the air, touching everyone present, especially the wealthy woman who stood alone in the back, her heart breaking open with long-buried truth. Daniel's words faded into silence as he concluded his speech about service and sacrifice. The audience sat transfixed, many wiping away tears after his moving testimony about finding strength in community after losing his wife. As polite applause filled the community center, he stepped back from the podium, ready to return to his seat beside Emily. But before he could move, a familiar figure rose from the back of the room. Veronica Lancaster, dressed simply in a blue sweater and slacks rather than her usual designer attire, walked purposefully toward the stage. Her heels clicked against the wooden floor, each step echoing in the suddenly quiet hall. Emily gasped, grabbing Hank's arm in surprise. Veronica approached the podium, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped its edges. Gone was her usual commanding presence. Instead, vulnerability showed in her tight shoulders and uncertain eyes. She cleared her throat, looking first at Daniel, then out at the sea of faces. "I wasn't scheduled to speak today," she began, her voice wavering. "But after hearing Sergeant Carter's words about dignity and character, I can't remain silent." She paused, drawing a shaky breath. "Many of you were at the downtown cafe 3 months ago. You witnessed something I've been ashamed of ever since." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as people remembered the incident. Daniel stood frozen at the side of the stage, his expression unreadable. "I treated a decorated veteran, a man who served this country with honor, like he was beneath me," Veronica continued, her voice growing stronger. "I threw hot coffee on him and berated him publicly. All because my expensive shoes were in a hurry and my privileged mind couldn't comprehend walking around someone." She turned slightly toward Daniel, though she couldn't quite meet his eyes. "What you didn't know was that this wasn't our first meeting. Years ago, before wealth hardened my heart, I knew Daniel Carter. I loved him." The admission hung in the air. Emily's mouth formed a perfect O of surprise. "But I chose pride over love," Veronica went on, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "I listened to those who said he wasn't good enough for our social circle. I let him go to war without a word of support. And when fate brought us together again in that cafe, I didn't just spill coffee. I poured contempt on the best man I've ever known." Her voice broke slightly, but she straightened her shoulders and continued. "These past few months, through the grace of his amazing daughter Emily, I've been given a second chance. A chance to see what real wealth looks like, the wealth of character, of kindness, of unconditional love, and what did I do? I threw it away again, because I cared more about what my shallow friends thought than what my heart knew was true." The room was absolutely silent now, every person leaning forward in their chairs. Daniel had taken a few steps closer to the podium, his expression softening. "So today," Veronica declared, her voice growing stronger, "I stand before you all to say this. I once threw coffee at the man I loved. Today, I pour out my pride instead." She turned fully to face Daniel now, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Daniel. Sorry for the cafe, sorry for the past, sorry for running away again. You and Emily showed me what real dignity looks like. You taught me that no one is too rich to care or too poor to matter." The words hung in the air for a moment, Emily's essay echoing in them. Then suddenly, Emily jumped to her feet, clapping with all her might. The sound broke the spell, and the entire room erupted in thunderous applause. People stood, cheering and wiping away tears. Through it all, Daniel and Veronica remained locked in each other's gaze, years of hurt and hope passing between them in that single look. Emily's delighted cheers rang out above the applause, her face glowing with joy as she bounced up and down in her sparkling blue dress. The sound filled the community center, wrapping around them like a warm embrace, as Daniel and Veronica stood suspended in this moment of truth and possibility. The autumn sun painted golden streaks across the empty lot where Emily's dream playground would soon stand. Scattered leaves danced across the ground as Daniel's truck pulled up to the chain-link fence. Emily bounced in her seat, pressing her nose against the window. "Look, Daddy, Miss Veronica's already here." Sure enough, Veronica's sleek car was parked nearby. She stood by the fence in jeans and a simple sweater, a far cry from her usual designer suits. Her hair was pulled back in a casual ponytail, and she held a large blueprint roll in her arms. As Daniel helped Emily out of the truck, he noticed Veronica's nervous fidgeting, the way she shifted from foot to foot. Emily ran ahead, her sneakers crunching through fallen leaves. "Miss Veronica, we came to see where the swings will go." Veronica's face lit up at Emily's enthusiasm, but her smile faltered when she met Daniel's steady gaze. The weight of their last encounter, her angry words at dinner, her hasty departure, hung between them like a heavy curtain. "I brought the final plans," Veronica said softly, gesturing with the blueprints. "But first, could we talk?" Daniel nodded, then turned to Emily. "Hey, sweetie, why don't you draw some pictures of what you want the playground to look like? I brought your sketchbook." Emily accepted the pad and colored pencils, settling cross-legged on a nearby bench. Her small tongue poked out in concentration as she began to draw, though Daniel noticed her sneaking glances their way. Veronica led Daniel a few steps away, her fingers twisting together. The morning breeze rustled through nearby trees, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and possibility. She unrolled the blueprints on the hood of her car, but didn't look at them. "Daniel, she began, then paused, gathering courage. "What I said that night at dinner, I was wrong. So terribly wrong. I let my so-called friends get in my head again, just like years ago. I chose their approval over what really matters." She looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "But standing in that community center, watching you speak about dignity and service, it hit me. All these years, I've been the poor one. Poor in spirit, poor in what truly counts. While you and Emily," she gestured helplessly, "you have real wealth, the kind money can't buy." Daniel remained silent, his face impossible to read. Behind them, Emily's pencils scratched against paper, punctuated by her quiet humming. "I spent 3 days in my big empty house after that speech," Veronica continued, "looking at all the expensive things that were supposed to make me happy. And you know what? None of it means anything. Not compared to Emily's laughter. Not compared to watching you teach her about honor and kindness. Not compared to," she swallowed hard, "not compared to the way you still look at me sometimes, even after everything I've done." She straightened her shoulders, meeting his gaze directly. "I don't care what anyone in my social circle thinks anymore. I don't care if they whisper at parties or drop me from their charity boards. The only opinions that matter to me now are yours and Emily's." The morning sun caught the tears on her cheeks as she added softly, "If you'll still have me in your lives." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. The same face he'd fallen for years ago, before war and wealth and walls had separated them. Finally, he reached out and took her hand. His calloused palm was warm against her trembling fingers. "Emily prayed for you every night," he said quietly, "even after you left. She said God would help the mean lady find her heart again." His lips quirked in a small smile. "Guess she was right." Veronica gave a watery laugh, squeezing his hand. "That little girl has more wisdom than all my fancy friends combined." As if on cue, Emily's voice rang out, "Daddy! Miss Veronica! Come see my drawing!" They turned to find her holding up her sketchbook proudly. She'd drawn 3 stick figures holding hands, one tall with spiky hair, one small with pigtails, and one with long hair wearing a heart-shaped necklace like Veronica's. Above them, written in wobbly letters, "My family." Emily bounced over to them, her eyes bright with hope. When she saw their joined hands, her face split into a radiant smile. She threw her arms around them both, squeezing tight. "Now we're really a family," she squealed, her joy echoing across the empty lot. Daniel wrapped one arm around his daughter while keeping hold of Veronica's hand with the other. For a moment, they stood together in the morning sunshine, their shadows merging on the ground. The sound of trucks approaching broke the spell. Construction vehicles rumbled down the street. Cement mixers, flatbeds loaded with lumber, and a small bulldozer. The playground project was officially beginning. Emily clapped her hands in delight as the first workers started unloading equipment. They began marking off areas with bright orange spray paint, here for the swing set, there for the slides, a wide space for the climbing dome Emily had specifically requested. The foreman approached with hard hat in hand, ready to review the final plans. But for just a moment longer, Daniel, Veronica, and Emily remained in their embrace, watching the work begin. The rumble of machinery and shouts of workers filled the air, but they were the sweetest sounds imaginable. The soundtrack of a dream taking shape, of a family being built on a foundation stronger than pride or fear. Like the playground rising from this empty lot, they were starting fresh, breaking new ground, building something beautiful together. The playground stood like a colorful castle against the clear blue sky. Fresh paint gleamed on the swings, slides, and climbing structures. Bright banners fluttered in the autumn breeze, and rows of folding chairs faced a small podium near the ribbon-draped entrance. Daniel adjusted his tie, feeling a bit uncomfortable in his formal attire. He watched Emily twirl in her favorite blue dress, her excitement impossible to contain. "Daddy, look how many people came!" she exclaimed, pointing at the growing crowd. Families streamed into the playground area, filling the chairs and spilling onto the grass. Daniel recognized faces from church, veterans from his support group, and dozens of parents and children from Emily's school. Hank and Joe, Emily's self-proclaimed bodyguards, stood near the back in pressed uniforms, grinning proudly. Veronica appeared beside them, elegant in a simple sundress. Gone were the flashy designer labels and status symbols she once prized. Her smile was genuine as she bent down to straighten Emily's hair ribbon. "Are you ready for your big moment, sweetheart?" Emily nodded enthusiastically. "Can I tell everyone about my dream? The one about nobody being too rich or too poor?" "Of course you can," Daniel said softly, his heart swelling with pride. He caught Veronica's eye, and they shared a knowing look. How far they'd come from that bitter morning in the cafe. The ceremony began with the town mayor welcoming everyone. As he spoke about community and coming together, Daniel felt Emily slip her small hand into his. Her other hand found Veronica's, linking them all together. When it was Emily's turn to speak, she stepped up to the microphone without hesitation. Her clear voice carried across the playground. "I had a dream that everyone could play together and be friends, no matter what. Now it's real." The crowd chuckled warmly at her simple wisdom. Veronica spoke next, her voice thick with emotion. "This playground represents more than just a place for children to play. It's about breaking down walls, the ones we build around our hearts." She glanced at Daniel. "Sometimes the greatest gifts come from unexpected places." Daniel's brief speech focused on thanking the community, but his eyes kept returning to Veronica and Emily, his family. The word felt right, settling in his heart like a missing puzzle piece finally found. The ribbon-cutting moment arrived. Emily stood between them, bouncing on her toes, as they each took hold of the giant scissors. "Ready?" Daniel asked. Together they cut the red ribbon as cameras flashed and applause erupted. Children immediately swarmed the playground, their laughter filling the air like music. Emily joined them, racing toward the swings with her friends. Parents mingled, sharing snacks and conversation while kids played tag and climbed on monkey bars. The afternoon passed in a blur of joy and celebration. Daniel watched Emily introduce Veronica to her school friends, proudly calling her "my other mommy," without hesitation. The term no longer caused pain or awkwardness. It felt natural, right. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the playground, families gradually said their goodbyes. The crowd thinned until only a few remained. Emily's energy seemed endless as she ran between the swings and slides, her laughter echoing in the quiet evening air. Daniel and Veronica stood side by side, watching her play. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, turning the playground equipment into silhouettes. Emily's figure darted back and forth between them, a joyful bridge between their once separate worlds. Veronica's hand found Daniel's, their fingers intertwining naturally. The simple touch held years of history, pain, and healing. Everything that had led them to this moment, the bitter coffee shop encounter, Emily's innocent wisdom, their slow journey back to trust. It all seemed worth it now. Emily ran to them, breathless and beaming. She threw her arms around them both, creating a circle of warmth in the cooling evening air. Daniel looked at Veronica over their daughter's head, seeing in her eyes the same peace he felt in his heart. "We're finally home," he whispered to Veronica, drawing both her and Emily into a gentle embrace. Around them, the playground stood as a testament to dreams made real, to bridges built, and to love that transcends all barriers. The sound of their shared laughter mingled with the evening breeze, carrying the promise of many more joyful moments to come. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Daniel Carter, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.